Hey everyone, welcome back to the Grounded Seeker podcast. This is episode 7 and my name's Sam. Today we're talking about how to 10x your shadow work. Sounds clickbaity, I know. You'll have to forgive me. Please forgive me. I have to play a little bit on the psychology of titles. I guess my philosophy is that I have something of value to offer, and sometimes it's beneficial to throw the bait out so that people actually listen. And I have a business that I'm running as well through this process, so it helps to get more views. All right, with all that honesty dump out of the way, how can we 10x our shadow work? This episode's going to go into a lot of detail around the concept of emotional coherence. So I'm going to unpack what exactly that is, if that's the first time you've heard about it. I'm going to draw upon some therapeutic models to explain how emotional coherence works. And I'm going to talk about how do you know if you're actually being emotionally coherent, which again will become important to you as to what that is, and some subtle attunements for people who are more advanced with this process, and also for beginners to bootstrap their process. And I also want to include a sort of role play later on as to what it might look like in a session, or if you were self-processing, the sorts of dialoguing you would be having with yourself to make sure that you're emotionally coherent to accelerate your shadow work as well. So, without further ado, let's get into it. And I want to start by explaining what is emotional coherence. Let's get on the same page. What does it mean to be coherent? Well, coherent means that you're in alignment with something. So there are other modalities out there, therapeutic modalities like cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, and these approaches focus more on essentially the mental aspect of experience. Being emotionally coherent, it focuses on the emotion. And it basically says no matter what trigger you're experiencing, basically says that makes sense. Because if we're coherent with our emotion and we follow that rabbit hole down through experience, so say for example we get triggered in a social encounter, somebody says something that activates this old dormant trigger in our experience. If we feel that in the body, rather than to use a counteractive approach, meaning that we are pushing against this experience with an approach like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, where we're trying to mentalize our way and strategize our way away from that experience, which by the way can be helpful. But instead with something like coherence therapy or simply attuning with emotional coherence, we experience that emotion fully and wholeheartedly and compassionately. So maybe there's a tightness in the chest. We experience that, and then we go down the rabbit hole with that emotion using a non-counteractive approach, again with a philosophy of that makes sense. Or in internal family systems, they use the phrase, there's no bad parts. And we follow the rabbit hole all the way down to the core. And what we usually find at the core of that experience is, not always, but something like a young child curled up in a ball who was perhaps hurt, humiliated, ashamed, or some other variation of hurt where there was too much emotion at once for the child to experience. And there wasn't enough safety, comfort, or soothing behavior from parental figures, friends, or loved ones to re-regulate the nervous system and integrate that painful experience. So usually as a result of that, we then fall into different coping strategies. And then those coping strategies, which typically look like us fully surrendering to that emotional learning that was imprinted on us at a young age. So if we're 5, for example, and we get yelled at and say that you're bad boy for being angry, then that 5-year-old internalizes that. Anger equals bad, maybe in that instance. And then we might do one of 3 things. Generally speaking, we surrender to that belief that anger is bad, or maybe even something like I'm bad inherently within me, and that becomes our identity. Or we overcompensate, where we then might get explicitly angry and recurrently angry to retaliate against the parent getting angry at us. So we overcompensate. Or we might avoid the expression of anger entirely and suppress it down in our system. So, we could avoid, overcompensate, or surrender. And it's very dynamic and unique to each experience. But nonetheless, what then tends to happen from that core wound, no matter what strategy we use, if we're not regulated, if we're not in a safe space and we're not reintegrating that experience from maybe comfort, skillful attunement from a parent or loved one or caregiver or friend, and we don't feel safe at all, usually we come to rely upon these coping strategies. And then we form something like a layer of identity. And that becomes our baseline of operation. So that if we were to, we get into a similar situation where we were about to express anger, depending on what coping strategy we used at a young age, that next subsequent layer of identity will then be added on to experience. So maybe again, it's just surrender, and when you feel anger, it gets co-opted with this feeling of shame if we were to surrender. So we feel anger plus shame, and that's what feels safe to our nervous system. So we get love and safety. Or if we overcompensate, we get really angry, then we might feel something akin to rage when parents get angry at us. And we don't know how to regulate it because we weren't skillfully attuned to. Or if we avoid, we might feel this feeling again of something like shame and anger combined, where we just don't allow ourselves to express the anger in order to get safety and love. And this is how identity forms. We form these deep somatic, meaning emotional, right? So if we're speaking about emotional coherence, that's what we're referring to. It's like a giant Lego structure of our identity gets built from these core affective wounds. And the earliest imprints we get are from our caregivers from childhood, from the ages of 0 to 2, where we develop our attachment bonding and we receive implicit memory structures and learnings or internal working models for the way that we engage with the world. So that's why these counteractive approaches like CBT, I believe, aren't as effective. Now, while they still are effective, and I'm even hesitant to put things on a hierarchy because there's evidence and scientific studies to show that CBT can be as effective as these emotional coherence-based therapies or interventions or ways of inquiring into experience. So it's not to create a hierarchy, but my experience has been that these experiential therapies are the way that we unlock and integrate and really meet ourselves in our core wound for a profound transformation. An analogy that's coming to mind for me now is rather than walking on eggshells with a more mental-based approach, we're diving right into the bottom of the barrel and swimming with these very early wounded parts by getting to them through skillful inquiry, essentially. Skillful inquiry accurate attunement, safety, and love. And from there, we can activate the memory reconsolidation process, which I'll talk about in another episode that's beyond the scope of this video. But when those electrical pathways are activated, as we know from research and science behind this, through the process of memory reconsolidation, we can integrate these new parts for lasting therapeutic change. I was reading some studies on PubMed the other day from AEDP, which is an experiential psychotherapy, to show that 6 to 12 months beyond treatment, over 16 sessions, patients reliably showed improvement. So these models work, these things work, the science works, and there's evidence to show that this is how we can actually do it. It's not just speculation, it's not just pseudoscience, right? So this is really good news for us. So that's what we're doing. That's what emotional coherence is. So to wrap that into a neat little bundle, it's essentially, let's say we go into a social situation, we feel a trigger, somebody acts in a certain way that sometimes we don't even know what it is they did explicitly, but something in our implicit memory gets activated. And implicit memory is just the unconscious, basically. And really, what if we trace that back, if we then say, okay, there's no bad parts, this makes sense. This feeling of tightness in my chest, this makes sense. Okay, let me meet that with compassion. Let me feel it and saturate my attention into it. And cultivate some degree of safety around this emotion through, compassion-based practices, which again is another episode in and of itself. And trace this back. And what we tend to find is we peel like an onion, like in Shrek, in Shrek, ogres are like onions, donkey. Sorry, that's probably not appropriate here. But if we peel back the onion layers, sorry. How good's Shrek, by the way? That's like a great movie, isn't it? I watched Shrek 1 and 2 recently. So we peel back the onion layers, and what we find is, okay, there's this mature adult who's now 35 years old, for example, who's feeling a tightness in his chest. So if I'm emotionally coherent, there's no bad parts. The next layer we feel underneath that is what might be something like a 15-year-old boy in high school who got rejected and then had to overcompensate and put on a mask by acting eccentric through the overcompensation mechanism to masquerade that underlying feeling, which then if we trace that back even further, for simplicity's sake, we notice a 5-year-old boy who was at daycare and got rejected by a group of 3 others, and he was left to his own devices. And he felt deeply hurt and ashamed and sad. Very sad, maybe even angry. So this frozen energy in the chest makes sense that it's there as a 35-year-old. Because if we then trace it back, actually it's not really a frozen it's a frozen emotion indeed, but it's an early childhood emotional learning in the implicit memory that is very hurt, rejected, and sad. And then again, when we have that pathway activated through skillful attunement from a therapist or through our own processing, if we get really good at this, although it's very helpful to have a therapist or some sort of coach, which, I'm doing a 90-day program soon. More about that later. To attune to us, to help safeguard us, to get to these places where we can fully experience that emotional learning full on, and then use memory reconsolidation practices, which is backed by science. And that's essentially emotional coherence in a nutshell. Now, I want to spend a bit more time unpacking what it looks like in a I guess what you would say a therapeutic process, like if we're in a one-on-one coaching session, what would that actually look like? Well, like I said, we peel back the onion layers. And what we tend to find, especially if we're attuned, there are usually layers of shame and defensive strategies that we use to not feel these places in our experience. And it makes a lot of sense, once again. I'll use the example, and I'm going to use an example later on in this of an actual process, so you can, something I just put together as an example of what it might look like in a session. But let's say, for example, with that 35-year-old male, we get triggered in a social situation, we feel that tightness in our chest, and we're in a coaching session one-on-one. But this can also happen just with self-processing as well. So it's a really interesting thing to watch when you do it yourself. So let's say we feel that tightness, and I'm attuning with you to that tightness. And as you feel that tightness, when we use skillful inquiry, you notice that it's something akin to, it's that 15-year-old, like, I don't want to be seen. I don't fit into the group here. Something like that. And we get that feeling. There's a lock and key mechanism that seems to happen, right? Because when we feel this emotion, this emotional tightness, we attune to it fully in the body. It's like a part of us, like just an individual part. So it can be useful to almost like feel this frozen emotion, and at first, at least while we're getting the hang of this emotional coherence process, you might like to imagine a young boy or a version of yourself that was younger. And as if that little boy was harboring the emotion fully, that tightness in the chest, how would he posture himself? Would he be making eye contact, or would he not be making eye contact? What would his facial expression look like? So then we've projected that tightness in the chest of the 35-year-old male onto this example of a 15-year-old boy. And at this point, we can then start to engage in a process of attunement to it, where we can ask it questions, intuitive questions. Like, what are you afraid of? And when we engage in a sort of dialogue like this, again, at first it helps to use imagination, but we don't have to. We start to get a sense of the deeper layers of the onion start to reveal themselves. When we start getting into Lord Farquaad's keep. Okay, sorry. When we start getting into the deeper places, that's where the gold starts to be found. Because our emotion body doesn't line. You know, the typical and famous saying, the body keeps the score. You really start to get a sense for this when you attune to your emotion body in a way like this, where we're not using a counteractive approach like CBT, but we're going completely coherent with the emotion. And we start to see with no shred of doubt that our entire psyche is constituted by an arrangement of different parts. Parts meaning early developmental aspects of our psyche that we've built identity upon. And some of those early parts, because they weren't integrated and they're fragmented from lack of attunement and safety, they're relatively dysfunctional. But again, it's not to beat them up. They also make complete sense. So our goal is to get to that core affecting emotion, that core affecting experience. But if we go to that 15-year-old boy where you're engaging with me as the coach, and you're reporting on this experience, I've got this tightness in my chest. I feel like I can't fit in. Okay. And I'm talking with you. And then maybe at this point, what happens is another coping strategy reveals itself as I attune to you fully, and you're experiencing that 15-year-old boy feeling afraid of being rejected as an example, then maybe a strategy comes online that says, but, it's okay because I know that I fit in and I know that I'm lovable. It's like even this positive self-talk can be a coping strategy that we learned to keep us away from feeling that buried hurt, that emotionally coherent buried hurt of just feeling the raw humiliation and shame of not fitting in. So other coping strategies can come in, and we need to be really careful and have a detached, loving, curious, spacious mind to observe that happening in real time. And this can be very subtle. These coping strategies can be incredibly quick and deceptive, and almost as if we're looking at the world through a set of goggles or something, and we don't even know that we're looking through the goggles. But if we have enough curiosity and discernment and a capacity and willingness to feel, what we'll notice is we can actually take those goggles off and observe and be like, oh, wow, there's that coping strategy that I've been using my whole life to defend myself from feeling the raw humiliation here. And usually, more often than not, that extra layer of, we'll actually call it resistance, is what makes the sensation feel so uncomfortable, because it's a way of distancing ourselves from the raw emotion, which in this case would be humiliation. But when we actually notice the coping strategy with slowing right down and feeling it directly, then when we can discern and see that, it softens the suffering, the resistance layer. So in a coaching session, I might point you out, if you said that, okay, I would ask you, what's it like for you to experience that feeling of humiliation in front of me right now? And then let's say that the coping strategy comes up and says, but, like, it's okay. Like, I know I'm lovable. It's like, okay, I'm like, all right, yeah, interesting. Just notice that and notice what it feels like in your body to acknowledge that. Let's just slow down. And then what you might actually notice is that, oh, wow, that feeling of saying that I'm lovable, while it sounds skillful, but it actually is an act of self-rejection as a way to get away from that raw feeling of humiliation. So sometimes even spiritual language can be co-opted by our ego to not feel our most primordial and helpless and innocent conditioning through maybe early spiritual endeavors and stuff. And you can see that part, that new part, the resistance layer that says, but I'm lovable, that could even be an older variation of, like, say, a 25-year-old version in the example of this 35-year-old man with the tightness in his chest, who read a spiritual book from like Thich Nhat Hanh or something, and then use that as a way at that time, because that's the best that the identity knew how to do at that point, to not feel these icky parts of experience. But we want to go right to those icky parts of experience. And then what we actually find in that process, it's very healing. And I think I've heard Angelo DeLullo say it as well. It's really like this. At some point, it actually becomes sort of enjoyable to really meet ourselves with slow, loving, spacious compassion, right? Rather than avoiding it and using spiritual concepts and even resting as awareness and non-dual teachings and these sorts of things to get away from this experience, which we can definitely do. Now, obviously, this is very dynamic and it takes a bit of skill and attunement, and then we would essentially keep going deeper from this point by using inquiry to get to those deeper layers of experience, to, get to, in this example, a 5-year-old boy who feels hurt and rejected and maybe angry. So in terms of subtle attunements that we can make, it's very valuable to have a soft, relaxed body when doing this sort of inquiry. And again, if we have that spacious, open, curious, loving mind, And we're just investigating ourselves, our psyche, like a movie character. And we just feel these parts of experience with a soft and open body. It's almost like we're opening up the energy centers willingly, saying, yes, like I want to see these parts. I don't want to hide from them anymore. I want to feel them through and through, all the way in my body. I want to feel the neural pathways that I learned as an innocent child. I want to feel the subtlety of that energy moving through my arms and legs. I want to feel into the center of my thighs and relax my calves and feel that shame of humiliation when I was a 15-year-old boy gently coursing through my body. And I want to give it my attunement in just the way that it needed at that time, rather than hiding away from it and, again, using things like non-dual teachings to get away from it. I really want to feel this. So that's a great way we can subtly attune. It's also good to be with a facilitator who we trust, who's actually been through the process, to accelerate the ways that we can distract ourselves. You know, for example, sometimes we can't even see when we're going into a coping strategy, but if you have someone skillfully attuned to you, and actually, this is a really important thing. I think this is why didactic relationships are so powerful in my experience from doing a lot of things like circle work and shadow work in collective groups, is we really want to get away from this feeling of aloneness that so many of us carry with trauma. Like, for example, I've had sessions with clients where they've been socially anxious their whole lives, and they show up in session, and there's a process of sort of acknowledging that, hey, you know, I'm feeling really socially anxious right now. And actually the acknowledgement from someone in a one-on-one relationship, or just in any sort of didactic or group relationship. By the way, didactic means dyads, so two people, one-on-one. And just the fact that somebody can attune to them and willingly accept them fully, exactly as they are, is completely attuned to them in the ways that they need, is open and accepting. There's something about that didactic human relationship that confirms to us that actually I'm not broken, because somebody has actually seen this really shameful part of me that I thought was so disgusting and could never be seen. And the nervous system starts to learn that actually, you know, it is safe. It doesn't do it overnight, but it does start to learn that it's okay, that it can be seen. Right? This is the dismantling of toxic shame. Another subtle attunement can be that we shouldn't dismiss emotions. I remember when I first began in this sort of processing, in this style of processing of emotional coherence, and I can imagine especially like a lot of middle-aged men, for example, maybe even some young men, even though I think young men tend to be a bit more open-minded just given the times, maybe women as well. But we might have this sense of, when we're doing this emotional coherent work, that when we're processing, say, like a tightness in the chest, or we're feeling something, there's this sense of, oh my God, that's in me? No, I don't, that can't be part of me. Like, surely that little 5-year-old boy's voice is like some illusion of my mind. Like, let's get away from that. Let me go back to, you know, watching YouTube or something. We just have to be really careful of the propensity of our mind to do that, to dismiss emotional experiences, because it can be really surprising what you find in this sort of processing. We just have to be mindful of justifying sensations away with, you know, either shame by saying, oh, there's no way that can be me, or, oh, but everyone feels this way, let me just palm this off. Right? And then we sort of distance ourselves subtly from the sensation. And by the way, a mentor of mine says, anything we say after the word but takes away everything you just said if we add but. So as an example, I feel really hurt about the thing that man said to me at the shop. But, I'm sure he was having a bad day and I don't really care. It's fine. Feel the energy of that rather than just saying, I feel really hurt by that man at the store today. See the difference? But it just takes away the previous statement, and that applies to anything and everything, by the way. And obviously the last little subtle attunement I'll add, and I mentioned briefly, is compassion. It can be very helpful when we're attuning to these parts in our experience that are really painful and frozen to ask a simple question like, what does this need? Can I offer this what it needed when I first experienced it for the first time, and just give it so much love and space and not give up on it. Give it all the time that it needs, complete reliability. I'll talk about compassion-based approaches in another video. Okay, so now I want to give a real demo of what this might look like in a somatic shadow work process. And I'm going to use AI voice to roleplay this scene. So hope it doesn't sound too janky. AI is pretty good now, so let's see how this goes. Okay, here we go. So John, you were talking about your frustrations toward awakening and how when you're doing self-inquiry, you feel this really strong sense of doubt.
Yeah, it's horrible. It's been going on for ages.
Yeah, doubt can be very, very painful and lead to feelings of hopelessness. Can you say more about this experience of doubt, how it's showing up for you, or whatever comes to mind?
Well, if I'm honest, I feel it most of the time throughout this whole awakening endeavor. I don't even know, man.
Oh?
Yeah, but I know that this is part of the process, and the teacher I'm learning from says it will pass once I have a shift.
So I'm hearing you're experiencing doubt all of the time. And what your teacher said may be true. And you said that you experience doubt all of the time. So let's go slow and feel into your body. Close your eyes and really let yourself experience that sensation of doubt. Maybe you can even bring up some mental images of when it has been really alive for you in experience.
I just get ashamed to talk about the fact that I'm doubting my spiritual practice. I've been meditating for so long, and I still have no idea what my true nature is.
Great, John. I appreciate the transparency, and really, honestly, I admire your honesty for truth. How does it feel for me to acknowledge that in front of you right now?
If I'm being honest and speak from that feeling of being ashamed, really uncomfortable. I feel naked and exposed, like you've seen a more vulnerable part of me, and I want to get away from here.
I understand. Again, thank you for being so honest. If you imagine that sensation had a sort of dial on it, where you could turn the sensation up or down in intensity, and you find just the right intensity where you feel comfortable to be with that sensation without overloading your system. Does that feel like it's possible to do?
It feels viable at about a 7 out of 10 right now if I sort of dial it in.
Okay, great. Are we able to sit with that just for a moment and just settle into that sensation?
Yeah. It's okay.
And if you were to simultaneously offer that feeling of being naked and exposed, to use your words, exactly what it needed right now, immediately and effortlessly, by asking the sensation directly what it needs, do you get a felt sense of what that might be like?
Yeah. I feel it wants to be shielded. And yeah, protected. With warmth from a protecting parent.
Perfect. Can you offer that sensation that now? Really feel for that warmth in your body, as if that warm protecting parent is really right there with you right now, attuning to you perfectly and supporting you in just the way that you need without effort.
Yeah, wow. It's flooding that feeling with warmth and it feels like it's dissolving.
Great, John. If you had a sense of what that emotion might say when you soften your body into it, as if you were completely safe and experiencing it with that protecting parent right beside you, feeling that warmth but at the same time as well. What might that shame say right now?
I think something like, don't look at me. Actually, no, it's more like, I'm ashamed I'm such a bad meditator who can't wake up. And I don't want you to look at me. Oh man, funnily enough, that's actually a relief to acknowledge. It feels like a warm, gushy sort of sensation just flooded my body as I let that really be seen by you.
Perfect, John. That's spot on. Yeah, you really notice that sort of lock and key mechanism when you get the right connection. Now, that protective layer of shame, that's sort of softened a bit now, yeah? We started talking about doubt toward awakening.
Even as you mentioned that my mind was already settling and reorienting to that initial feeling of doubt. I feel it in my body when I bring my last meditation sit to mind. I just watched a YouTube video about self-inquiry, and I don't get it. They all say the same thing, and I'm feeling so hopeless about this whole awakening thing.
So where do you feel that doubt in your body right now?
It's like doubt mixed with frustration.
Yep, I understand. We can speak to both parts, actually.
Overall, I feel it through my shoulders and face. This is that damn feeling that's been arising all along.
Good. Pull your awareness sort of outwardly a little bit. So let's not be totally blended with the sensation. Let's get a little bit of space around it. So you might even use a question like, who am I? Or just let your mind soften outwardly. I like the analogy of falling onto the bed after a long day at work. And observe the doubt from this place with a sense of compassionate curiosity. So we can now really see it clearly. Really feel it. What do you think that doubt might say? Just again, if it were an innocent 5-year-old, like really feel it unapologetically, taking as long as you need.
Well, I know for sure this doubt always arises because when I was a child, I always screwed up in school.
Let's take it slow, John. Really slow down and feel your body. I'm hearing you screwed up a lot in school, and that might be relevant here. But I just want to make sure that we're attuning to the sensation of doubt here and now, as if you were feeling your way to an answer and maybe not referring to a previous memory from the mind that you've done previous shadow work on or something like that. I just want to make sure that we're really attuning to what's here and now rather than what you think could be here and now.
Oh yeah, I see what you mean. It's subtle. Oh, wow.
What's happening for you?
As I felt the doubt and really dropped into it, I noticed these really early memories flashing into mind of being called stupid. Wow. I remember feeling this. When I was a kid and doing chores, Mom and Dad would always come in and get really mad at me for not doing it to their standard. Like I was a real screw-up and I couldn't get it right no matter how hard I tried. Yeah, that feels right.
I see, yeah.
Yeah, it's bizarre. The doubt toward awakening feels exactly like this.
So how do you interpret your parents getting mad at you for not meeting their standard? Really feel for what belief you took in. What did you learn and at the level of your emotion body at that time?
I feel like I just can't get it done. I can't get the job done. I'm stupid.
What's it like for you to acknowledge that in front of me right now?
Well, I get a little wave of shame like before that you can see me experiencing this, but it actually feels pretty relieving at the same time, like I don't have to hide this stuff behind heaps of layers anymore.
Right, so okay, you get the idea. I'll probably end that role play there. So, do you see how we went down the rabbit hole of what was emotionally coherent? At first, there was an experience of talking about doubt, and then a protector came up as the experience of shame. Then when we met that shame, that protector felt safe enough to soften, which then again revealed the doubt. And then as we felt that doubt, there was another little protective layer that came up that sort of dismissed the emotion by saying, but. So there was just a checking, and there was also a process of seeing if whether or not the emotion was being referenced from the mind. This can happen sometimes where like there's a previous shadow work experience, or there's something that we've concluded that we're telling ourselves that certain emotions mean in our experience. But in reality, if we really feel the sensation, there's a sort of like a revealing, we feel our way to the answer. That can also happen. So intellectualizing the process can be a incoherent way of attuning to our experience. So it takes attunement from a skilled therapist or coach to do that sometimes, because we can bamboozle ourselves. And then when we felt into that further, the doubt in this role-playing experience, it revealed itself to be something from early childhood. So we got to a deeper onion layer there, essentially. And so you can see how we were peeling off the layers one by one to get to a deeper place in experience. And then that might even progress, that experience, to sensations like repressed anger, repressed sadness as well can also arise, these sorts of experiences. And when we meet those emotions, if we continue to go deeper, so sometimes they can be very uncomfortable to experience. And there are a lot of protectors around things like anger, for example. But if we just meet them one by one and use skillful inquiry to find our way there and just slowly but surely peel it apart, we can gently and firmly sometimes find our way to the core affecting emotion. And while it can sometimes seem scary, it can actually feel incredibly liberating to slowly feel these parts. And usually what we notice, and this is terminology from an experiential intervention called AEDP, once we get to the core affective emotion, there's usually a sense of, that's it. That's what it is. And even if it's sadness or like a real sense of anger, there's a relief to be able to feel such a beautiful, untainted, raw emotion that just says like, I'm really angry at him. And it's like, yes, I've been wanting to experience that my whole life. I knew it deep down. I've intuited it. And now that I've been able to let it out of my system rather than bottling it up as a frozen emotion my whole life, it just feels so good, so fluid, so open. Or sadness that just feels like, I want to cry my eyes out. And like, that feels beautiful. Like, thank you for letting me experience this. But we're so conditioned to push these things down through trauma, through identity structures, that it really takes attunement and emotional coherence to finally find our way here. And it also feels like quite warm in that demo thing that I did there, that demo session. It was like warmth, right? Sometimes that can be experienced as a sensation of warmth and release, and a sense of, yes, this is it. Like, this is really what I've been looking for. Right. And then, so this is a thing that non-duality won't get to, right? They'll just say rest is awareness, which again has its place. But if we really want to do the deep emotional integration work, that we need to be more active. And I hope this has sort of illuminated to you what that might look like. I just want to finish up as well. There is something that I would have appreciated to hear. Sometimes we get so overwhelmed in our daily life if we have a lot of trauma, say from a social encounter or something like that. And we just have this really deep sense of freeze in our body, or our body just feels so locked up and unable to do anything. And it's really, really painful. So what do we do in this situation when it's almost effortful to even attune to our sensations? We just want to distract ourselves. We just want to get away from the sensation. We just want to do anything we can to not feel. And this is really where it helps to have just like a radical curiosity. Radical curiosity. Because some of this stuff can even be pre-verbal from childhood, and we can't even connect to emotional coherence. We can't even find any words that sort of confirm the experience or Velcro to the experience. It's just too much, too fast. So, little suggestion from me is to exercise a lot of compassion at that point. And the way that I do that is I attune to my body. I feel the entirety of my experience and really dial in and feel the subtlety of the different emotional layers and just feeling them one by one as best I can. So what that might look like experientially is there's all this pain in the body. So I can just get my attention on what feels like the thread of a painful, numb sensation. I can put my finger on the pulse of it just a little bit. And that's sufficient. That's my gateway. And then there's a sort of curious, open attention that really is just feeling and has a willingness to feel. And then you could simply just ask, what does this sensation need? If it could effortlessly receive exactly what it is that it needed in childhood, fully and unapologetically right now. And I know in my experience what it might need. And then we might imagine an ideal parent figure, for example, coming over to us and consoling us in just the right way. Or maybe they keep a little bit of distance and we know that they're just available if we need them. And they come over and they experience this sensation with us, or maybe just have a gentle bit of warm touch on the experience. And just also being mindful and noticing with curiosity, like what our mind does. Does it try to distract from this experience? Does it try to get away? Does it try to watch a YouTube video to get away from the feeling of this numb, tight, overwhelming sensation? And we're just feeling how, like, wow, look at these adaptive strategies that the mind does. They're brilliant to not feel this painful emotion. They're absolutely brilliant. And it makes sense that they are the way they are. But I'm going to finally put a wedge in between my experience and get really curious to be able to feel this experience full on right now. And you know what? I'm not shunning distraction. Sometimes I've even made agreements with myself that when I'm so overwhelmed like that, usually at nighttime, in the morning there's usually more of a capacity, I notice, but in the evenings it feels quite difficult if I'm completely overwhelmed. I'll make an agreement with myself that, you know what? I can distract myself now, but I'm going to have to come back and process this emotion. Like I might watch 5 TV show episodes or something, you know, or eat a bit of chocolate or something to get away from this pain in the body. But later, you know, whether it's the next day or an hour later for a little bit of meditation, I'm going to have to do some degree of processing. So just making small agreements with myself like that so I can give myself the relief of just having a bit of a break. Sometimes that's really useful. And usually if we can do that, if we can do it for just a little bit and break through those initial really numb layers by skillfully attuning to our painful sensation, that can then lead us to deeper places where once the body thaws out from its freeze response just enough, then we might start to be able to notice that we can peel those onion layers away rather than sort of being stuck floating around the outside of the onion, unable to even get contact on it. So then we can take the process deeper. All right, guys. I hope this helps you. As I said, I'm doing a 90-day program where I want to focus on 1 to 3 core self-sabotaging behaviors over a 90-day period alongside, a course curriculum with guided meditations for integration and also really powerful tracking to see if we're actually making progress in daily life with these sorts of inquiries that we'll be doing in the program. I'm really excited for it. I think it's going to be really helpful, and it's what I would have wanted 2 years ago. I'm trying to make that ideal product that I would have loved 2 years ago. There's a link in the description to sign up to my newsletter to basically get notified, be one of the first to be notified. I'm only taking on a small amount of people, probably 10 people to do this work with. So make sure you subscribe to the newsletter, and I'll announce that there at first, so you'll be the first to know. But yeah, I hope you found this helpful. If you did, please like the video, drop a comment, let me know what you thought. If you have any suggestions or any questions or anything like that on emotional coherence. I truly believe if you really let this in, it will amplify 10x, dare I say, your shadow work. And a lot of love to you guys.